And if you want to follow along, and I hope that you will, you'll want to turn to the Book of Ecclesiastes. That's right, we are back in Ecclesiastes. We had about 3 lessons as I began working my way through that book. And then March happened, and I suspended that as we pursued some other topics and patiently waited for the world to return to normal. And the whole plan was, well, I'll get back into Ecclesiastes when the time comes and we can all get back together in a single service. Well, I don't know when that's going to be. Hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later, but it's not going to happen in the next couple of weeks, obviously. And so I said, it's time to get back to Ecclesiastes. And so this is going to be our 4th lesson through this extraordinary book. And we are going to take a look this morning at one of the most famous poems in all of the world. That's right, one of the most famous poems in all of the world is right here, found right here in Scripture. Now, it was even famous before that American rock band took it to number 1 on the charts in 1965. You know the song, at least a lot of you old heads know the song, you know. There is a season turn. That's all you're getting from me, though. That's it. But you know the song. Like I said, they took it to number 1 in 1965, but the poem was famous long before then. Let's take a look at it. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Let's begin by reading it. Then we're going to unpack it. We're going to make some observations that I think will be relevant to us today. There is an appointed time, and there is a time for every event under heaven. A time to give birth and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to throw stones and a time to gather stones. A time to embrace and a time to shun embracing. A time to search and a time to give up as lost. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear apart and a time to sew together. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. Well, let's take a look at each of those lines for a minute. We'll start, of course, right where the writer of Ecclesiastes, the preacher, starts with a time to give birth and a time to die. You know, that's the bookends of life, at least life under the sun. And you know that expression if you were with us before we went into our lockdown in March and you were here for those first 3 lessons. You know that expression, under the sun, is one of the more very familiar expressions in the book of Ecclesiastes. Well, these are the bookends of life under the sun. It's a reminder of just how fragile life is. It's a reminder that generations come and generations go. Leola and I were riding our bikes yesterday, and we were in this state park, and there was a big sign that was on the trail. And I said, let's stop and look at these pictures. You could tell they were old pictures. And we got off, and it was about life in that area of Tennessee, along the Tennessee River, way back. And there were the black and white photos, and there were the families standing there. There were the kids. There was the babies. There were the parents. There were the old folks. They were working in lumber mills, and they were fishing, and they were planting crops. And I say, yeah, there it is. You know, it reminds me of the lesson tomorrow. Generations come, generations go. One generation comes, and then we die, and another generation replaces us. Just endless cycles of generations. You know, a lot of people really actually find some comfort here in this statement. Time to give birth and a time to die. It's often read at funerals as an expression of comfort. But there's nothing comforting there. Well, death is just a part of life. It's just part of the cycle of life. It wasn't supposed to be that way. God never intended for us to die. That wasn't God's plan in the beginning. Death is an enemy. And we're not supposed to be this way. It's just a reminder of a fallen world. There's a time to give birth and a time to die. And it's not just the human world, it's everything. Look at the next line, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted. Plant life ends too. Listen, some of you, you pour your heart, and you pour your time, and you pour your energy, and you pour your resources into planting and cultivating, and you just hope and pray that insects, you can keep them at bay, and that it'll rain and you'll get water. And even if all of that happens and it's a great year and those crops are productive, there's going to come a time where they end their productivity and they're just going to die and they're just going to be uprooted. And then look at verse 3. A time to kill and a time to heal. Now, what should be our takeaway from that? There's a time to kill and a time to heal. Well, listen, the takeaway from this is not that you should start making a list of everyone that you would like to snuff out. That's not the takeaway from this. This is not a license to kill. What he's probably just saying here, this is probably talking about appropriate forms of killing. What do I mean appropriate forms of killing? Well, things like self-defense or just warfare or capital punishment. Or maybe it's not even talking about that. Maybe there's still this continuation of this agricultural connection, the time to plant and the time to uproot what is planted. And one moment you're going to be nurturing this animal and trying to make it healthy, and then there's coming a time when you just have to put it down. Most of us have probably been there. I was with a couple yesterday, and we were sitting and got a phone call. They got a phone call, and he looked at his phone and said, "Oh, I got to take this. It's the vet." And it was about one of their dogs. It was a part of the family, and things aren't good. And they've spent time and they've spent money through the years nurturing the health. But the time's coming really quick in the next few days to where they're not going to be able to nurture it to health anymore. They're going to have to put it down. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build up. We pour our dreams and our time and our effort and our energy into building homes, planning buildings and structures. But inevitably, they're all going to go away. Inevitably, they're going to be replaced by something else. So we were out in a state park yesterday, and we're close to this little town of Linden. I said, let's run into Linden, Leola. And I said, I've never been through Linden. It's just down the road. I said, I forgot the Lord's Supper for the folks there, and I said at the church, so anyway, I got to find some grape juice and some unleavened bread for them. I feel obligated now to get that, and so we'll find a grocery store there. And said, but there was, on that sign, there was this Civil War. It had a connection to the Civil War, and as a history buff, and what happened was, you know, during the Civil War, it was there was a Confederate garrison there, and the Union troops did an amphibious assault, and the courthouse, they burned it to the ground. And you can go there today, and the spot is there where it was, but the structure's not there. Of course, the Yankees destroyed it. But then it was rebuilt. And then that lasted for a few more years to about 1920. Fire burnt it to the ground. The courthouse that's standing today, that's the third one in its place. That's just the nature of things. There's a time to tear down, and there's a time to build up. Everything is eventually cleared for something else. A time to weep, verse 4 says, and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance. It's a reminder that in this cruel, fallen world that we live in, there are moments of incredible joy and laughter, and then there are moments of excruciating pain and sorrow. Every wedding is going to ultimately see on the other end of it a funeral, every one of them. We all celebrate at the wedding, and then we might hear not too long after, oh, there's been a terrible accident. Or there might be that person who they want to start a family so bad, and we rejoice and we celebrate, oh, she's pregnant. And then it ends with a heartbreaking miscarriage. That's the nature of life here. There is this cursed world that we live in. There's a time to weep and a time to laugh. There's times for mourning and there's times to dance. Verse 5, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones. What in the world does that mean? Well, it might refer to an ancient practice of warfare. We don't really have time to look at it, but if we did, we could turn to 2 Kings and we could see where when God told his people to go attack, I believe it was the Moabites, he said, fill their fields with stones. You make them unproductive. And then, of course, there's others where we can see, and he planted a field and removed all the stones. It's about either making land unproductive or making it productive, or it might just be a metaphor for relationships. In fact, the last part of verse 5, a time to embrace and a time to shun, embracing, might lend itself more to a metaphor for there are times to create new relationships, and then there are times when relationships will be severed. Life moves on, right? You know, when I was growing up, I had good friends. I thought we'd always be good friends. They're not even in my life anymore. It's not that I don't like them. I don't even know them. I don't even know where they're at anymore. Hey, my college roommate's coming to the 10:30 service. We've kind of stayed in contact, but I bet we've seen each other over the last 30 years 5 or 6 times. He's passing through town and he called me. But for everyone like that, I got the worst memory. Everybody, I'm talking to people I went to college with and they go, hey, you remember so-and-so? I'm like, no, I don't remember them. Well, do you remember that time? And I'm like, no, man, I don't remember that time. Well, you do remember that so-and-so and so-and-so, right? And I'm like, no, not really. Relationships begin and relationships end. And life just moves on. It's the nature of relationships. Some of you have never lived anywhere else, and that's great and fine and all. Some of us have moved around all of our lives. North Indiana and South Dakota and East Tennessee and Florida and Alabama and wherever. And you know what happens? You grieve because you're leaving relationships that mean so much to you. And let me tell you what happens when you get to that new place? You start relationships. And those become your most cherished relationships. It doesn't mean you, again, forget all of the past relationships or there doesn't remain a connection with some, but it's just, relationships come and relationships go. Life moves on. Let's keep looking. Verse 6, a time to search and a time to give up is lost. There are some things that we want, but there comes a time to admit sometimes things are gone forever. And it's just time to move on. Sitting with somebody yesterday, they sat on a picnic table, they go, oh, here's a hair. And I go, oh, is it mine? And she said, you wish. Oh, yes, I wish. But it's gone. And it's gone forever. But not just about trivial things like that, about all kinds of things in life. It's just the nature of life. Sometimes we just have to admit that some things are gone forever. And we just have to move on with life. A time to keep and a time to throw away. You know, there's some things we just keep. We are that picture or something from kindergarten, right? I got this. I got a few of these. I went in my office. I just got this out of my office. It's been on my shelf. If it looks like green cotton balls, it's because it's 4 green cotton balls. And they're glued to like a little tongue depressor. And on the back of that tongue depressor is my daughter's 5-year-old name that she wrote. Listen, she turns 30 this February. I've been carrying around George the Worm for almost 25 years. I remember her bringing it home. That's George. There's his little face. And that was in South Dakota. And I brought it back to Nashville, and then I took it over to Maryville, and then back to here. George has went with me, and George has been on my shelf everywhere I've been. And, you know, I'll keep George there until the day I die, and, you know, she may look at it and smile and then just toss it away. We keep some things. But listen, there are other things. It's time to throw some things away. Listen, some of you got clothes in your closet that you think you're going to fit in again. You really think that, don't you? You're hanging on to them because you think you're going to fit into them. Now, some things, you know, it's time for a trip to Goodwill. It's time for a trip to the dump. It's time to post some things on Facebook Marketplace. It's time. There is a time to keep and then a time to throw away. Verse 7, a time to tear apart and a time to sew together. This is probably talking about the Jewish practice of mourning, when they would tear their clothes in periods of deep grief, and then they would sew it together. Grief is over. It's reminding us that, you know, in life there are going to be periods of grief. And then you get back to living. At least you should get back to living. A time to love, or a time to be silent, into verse 7, and a time to speak. That might refer to the wisdom of confronting someone or refraining. There are times when you need to confront, and then there are times when it's just best to keep silent and pray. And it might be referring to the wisdom to know when it's time to speak and when it's time to just be silent. A time to love and a time to hate. There are things that we ought to hate. And if you wonder what some of those are, all you have to do is turn on the news or get on a news channel or open a newspaper. Plenty of things to hate in this world. And then a time for war and a time for peace. It's nice to kind of live in a corner of the world where there is relative peace, but it won't always be that way. Well, what can we do? What can we do as a world body and as nations to stop war and just create peace all over the world? Nothing. Nothing. There will always be war. Always be war under the sun. And there will always be periods of peace. That's the poem. So what does the poem mean? Well, to understand the meaning of this poem, you have to understand that it doesn't stand alone. A lot of people read those first 8 verses in that poem as though it stands alone, but it doesn't stand alone. It is a mistake to isolate this poem from the rest of the chapter. You don't understand the meaning until you read the verses that follow. The poem actually presents a problem. And the prose that follows the poem seeks to resolve the problem. So what is the problem then? Well, the problem is in verse 9. Take a look at it. This is how it summarizes it. What profit is there to the worker from that in which he toils? What profit is there to the worker from that in which he toils? Verse 9 is one of the many sucker punches that you'll find in the book of Ecclesiastes. It just drills you. You work hard. This is saying in verse 9, you work hard and you get nowhere. You work hard and you get absolutely nowhere. You just move from one season of life to the next season of life. Life under the sun just has a rhythm to it. There's good and there is bad. There is joy and there is sorrow. That is the nature of life under the sun. 14 positives in those 8 verses and 14 negatives. Negative 14 and positive 14 equals 0. You get nowhere in life. Every birth ends in death. Everything that is planted is uprooted. Everything that is built is replaced. Every celebration has a funeral on the other end of it. Every period of peace has a war coming. That's what this is saying. You just move from one season to the next and you get a big fat 0. You go through all of the seasons of life and then what? You die. You die. You come and you go and you die, and they put you in a box and they put you in the cold hard ground. That's what it is. That's why I always find it interesting that so many people find comfort in this poem. The poem's not comforting at all. This poem haunts us. Do you understand that? It haunts us. It tells us that with time, what happens with time, dreams are fulfilled and dreams are crushed. Joy comes and it's replaced by sorrow. Given enough time, there is going to be fear, there is going to be anxiety, there is going to be tears, and there is going to be death. That's what it's telling us. This poem mocks us. The poem just haunts us. That's what it's saying. Everything in this poem could have been written by a good atheist poet. There is nothing distinctively believing about this poem. Time is fleeting and it is filled with sorrow. That's the point of the poem. That's the sucker punch of the poem. But then we come to verse 10. And we come to verse 10, and what the writer of Ecclesiastes, the preacher's doing here, he's given us reality with a capital R, and he's saying, now, when you understand reality, it ought to drive you to God. He introduces a perspective here in verse 10. It's a wonderful perspective. It is meant to carry us through life. I want you to look at verse 11. Verse 11 says, He has made everything appropriate in its time. Now, probably a better translation than appropriate is beautiful. If you've got the NIV or the ESV or the King James, it says He has made everything beautiful in its time. And He has also set eternity in their heart. Now, that's one of the most famous lines from the book of Ecclesiastes. He has set eternity in our hearts. What does that mean? Well, I'll tell you what it means. When we understand how life really is, that we're born, we work, we die, and that's it. And it's all the positives are balanced out with negatives, and that's the way it is. When we understand that, He's telling us that we don't want it to be that way. I don't want it to be that way. I don't like it that way. I don't like it that there are times that we're going to mourn. I don't like that. I don't like that there's times of death. I don't like that there are times to stop looking for something because it'll never come back. I don't want that. I don't like that some relationships have to end. I don't like that. I don't want it to be that way. I want it to be better. And that's what it means here in verse 11. And that's what I love about this picture. We're standing on one end and we're looking through the curtain and we know there's something better over there. We know that God has planned, as He says in the first part there, verse 11, He has made everything appropriate in its time. He's made everything beautiful in its time. God has a plan. And in God's plan, He is preparing something that is going to be mind-boggling. In His time, He's going to change it all. This is how life, verses 1 through 8, this poem, this is how life is under the sun. It's not how life is going to always be for God's people. Because God has a bigger plan and God is going to take care of everything. We can't see that plan though. Look at the last part of verse 11. Yet so that man will not find out the work which God has done from beginning even to the end. I like how the New Living Translation says that. But even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. From where I stand, I can't see it. But God's working it. All I can see, go back to verse 10. I have seen the task which God has given the sons of men with which to occupy themselves. My perspective is limited. This is all I can see. What God has given me to do and where He has put me, that's all I can see. But God has a bigger plan. He's put eternity in my heart, and I want better times. I want everything to be better, and I want everything to be right and perfect. And in God's time, as He's working His plan, eventually it's going to be that way. It's going to be perfect. So what do? Well, what I do then is I just trust God. I can just trust God. Take a look at verse 12. I know that there is nothing better for them than to rejoice and do good in one's lifetime. Moreover, that every man who eats and drinks sees good in all his labor. It is a gift from God. I long for the resolution of pain. I long for the resolution of dissatisfaction. I want to see the bigger picture, but I can't see the bigger picture clearly. Only God can see the bigger picture, and He's working toward that, and I've just got to trust Him because I'm bound by time, but God is not. Look at verse 15. That which is has been already, and that which will be has already been, for God seeks what has passed by. Listen, do you ever want to undo something? Would you ever like to go back and undo something? Go back and do something that will change the potential of the pain that you experienced? You can't. You can't. But God can, because God's not bound by time. Listen, the message is really simple. Life is full of bad times and life is full of good times, and you're not in control, but God is in control. And what a difference that makes for living in the now. Listen, it makes all the difference in the world living in the now when I know that there is going to be a then. And that's what the writer of Ecclesiastes is telling us. For God's people, the now isn't all there is. There is a then. And knowing that there is a then, it means that I can prepare for those chapters of my life that are going to be filled with sorrow and pain and suffering. And it means when I'm going through that, I don't give up, because I know there is going to be a then. You know, when it comes to so many people who have taken their own lives, just one of the most tragic things ever is when a person takes their own life. And so many do so because they don't see a then. They don't see a not yet. All they see is the now. And the now can be so awful. And it can be so painful. And they just can't deal with the now because that's all there is. But the writer of Ecclesiastes is saying, no. There's not just a now. There's a then. And because there is a then, there's a then when God is going to make everything right. And so I can wait and I can live with complete trust and confidence in God's plan that I can't see from my perspective. God's going to resolve all past wrongs. Look at verse 16. Furthermore, I have seen under the sun that in the place of justice there is wickedness, in the place of righteousness there is wickedness. I said to myself, God will judge both the righteous man and the wicked man, for a time for every matter and every deed is there. God's going to take care of it. I said to myself, God is going to take care of it. He's going to resolve all past wrongs. He's going to banish all past pain. He's going to settle all past injustices. And so, we can rest in that. We can rest in God. That's what it meant there in verse 13. We see in everything that it's a gift from God. I can drink deeply from life and those moments of joy in life, because I recognize that even as pain is inevitable and suffering and pain is inevitable, that there are times of joy, and God has gifted us with those, and we can embrace it, and we know that those are going to ultimately, through God's plan and His work through the cross, it's going to always be like that eventually. So drink deeply from those moments of joy. Enjoy them, because they're not going to last forever. Enjoy them. Recognize what they are. They're gifts of God. Cuddle the kids. Play with them. Enjoy it. Enjoy your family time. Enjoy your workout. Enjoy eating that fattening dessert. Enjoy it. Enjoy it. Listen, enjoy the gifts of life. And as you're enjoying the gifts of life and thanking God for His good gifts, you keep holding on to Him in the painful times. Don't live in fear of them that they might happen, because they're going to happen. Just trust God to help you get through those. to the eternity that is set in your heart. God's got this. Now, as we close, though, I want you to notice one thing. I want you to look at verse 14, the very end of it. This is where resting in God begins and ends. This is where it begins, and this is where it ends. I know that everything God does will remain forever, and there's nothing to add to it. There is nothing to take from it. For God has so worked that men should fear Him. That's where it begins. You cannot rest in God unless you fear God. And we understand what fear, the concept of fear is in Scripture. It begins with the idea of the recognition that God is sovereign, that He is in control of the world, that we respect Him, that we love Him, that we want to walk with Him, that we want to belong to Him, we want to give our lives to Him, we want to worship Him. That's what it means. This is where an education about life begins. That's what the writer of Proverbs says. If you want to know how to win at life, it all starts here. It all starts with a relationship with God. For those who don't have a relationship with God, listen, this life is pretty haunting. For everyone. I know that there are people that you think their life is just all put together. I know you think some. If you think that, you're probably pretty young. But some of you think that their life is all put together and everything's good and they've never had anything bad happen. That's baloney. You live long enough, verses 1 through 8, that's life. But it's not always going to be that way. And if you'll trust God, if you'll surrender to Him, He's working something out that is mind-boggling. So as you go through this world of pain, embrace the joy, embrace the gifts that God has given you, praise Him and glorify Him for it, and let Him help take you through those moments of pain until we can get to the fulfillment of that eternal plan. So do you fear God this morning? That is, have you obeyed the gospel? Have you surrendered yourself to Christ and His atoning work by confessing Him as the risen Lord, by repenting of your sins, and being buried with Him in baptism for the forgiveness of sins? If you haven't done that this morning, why don't you start fearing the Lord today by accepting His invitation to be a part of His family? If you've done that, but maybe you've wandered away and you've been distracted by this life, this cursed, broken world, don't get so enamored with it that you lose sight of what God is planning. Come back to Him. He's going to do something extraordinary for those who fear Him. Come back to Him. If it's something that you need to do publicly, we want to encourage you to do that this morning. We want to pray with you. We want to pray for you. And so if you have a need that you need to take care of, do it right now while together we stand.